Hi everyone. Today I'm going to chair this session. I had the opportunity to virtually meet Arianna months ago because I had like an interest in the publishing world, but I had no idea on how to get closer to this world. So we have like a Facebook page in which there are present more or less like all the Italian researchers, and in this Facebook page, I decided to post a question related to the publishing in order to get some tips and advice on how to get closer to this world, since usually it's not a career path that a young researcher thinks of. So among all the comments, Arianna has been really nice and kind because she offered the opportunity to talk a little bit more with me about the publishing. So we had like a video call, and since then we have been in contact, and I had the idea to let Arianna talk to us a little bit more about the publishing world, but in particular about open data and open science, since she's working for Nature Communication Physics. So just to introduce you to Arianna, Dr. Arianna Bottinelli is an associate editor at Nature Communication Physics since July 2019. She handles manuscripts in complex system, network science, and biophysics. She also has a background in theoretical physics with a fervent interest in collective behavior in social animal, especially during crowd disasters. She's also a polyhedric person. Indeed, she's interested in the interconnection between science and art. So thank you for joining us, Arianna, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, well, thanks for such a nice introduction and for having me. Now I'm going to try to share my screen and to start the presentation. So host disabled participant screen sharing. So I think Tess has to make me somehow presenter. Tess is muted, so I don't know what's.
It should be good now, yeah.
Okay. Now I have to decide which screen to share. Let's try this. And let's start the presentation. Okay. Do you see my presentation? Brilliant. Okay, so hello everyone again. This is my first online presentation, so I'm a bit excited and very grateful to have the chance to do this. As introduced, I'm going to talk about open access and open science from a publishing point of view, but I will try to frame open science in its historical context as well. Flavia said everything about me already, so I am a physicist and I did some research, and then at some point I transitioned to be an associate editor. I am a physicist again, and I handle manuscript in physics, and I do some biophysics, but so I understand my background is quite different from most of your background. So if at some point I say anything weird, please just write a question in the chat box, and someone will take care to forward it to me. So I work within Nature family. I will use the Nature journals for basically introducing some concepts that are relevant to open access and open science. So this is a glance of the research journal in Nature. There is, well, the oldest one is Nature, which was launched in 1869, while more specialized journal started being launched in 1970s. The first ones were Nature Physics and Nature Biology. And then later on, you see Nature Communication and Scientific Reports, which are multidisciplinary. And then the latest in the family are the communication journals, which are Communications Physics and Biology. They were launched in 2018. And the last one arrived is Communication Medicine. So you look at this, it's one family, and you wonder straight away, so why do we have so many journals? It's like we have physics here, physics there. So two concepts that we need to understand why there are so many journals, and also to understand open access a bit, is our scope and impact. Scope of a journal is related to the topic that is published by the journal. So Nature is born as an interdisciplinary journal, so covers all natural sciences. And this is the same for Nature communication and scientific reports, while the Nature research journals and the communication journals focus on a specific topic, which can be, again, physics, medicine, and genetics, and biology, and so on. And the other important variable is the selectivity of a journal. So this indicates the term selectivity and impact, that indicates basically how strict are the requirements of the journal for publishing a certain paper. A proxy, even if sometimes it's not completely appropriate, is the famous impact factor of a journal, which is basically how many citations the articles get in the journal with respect to the amount of articles. So if you publish a few articles but you have a lot of citations, it means those articles are very influential, they are very impactful on their in their community. So in other words, the question is what sort of research, who is interested in the research that is published in each journal. So to give you an example, the research published in Nature Biomedical Engineering is selected by the editors to be relevant to all researchers in biomedicine. So whether they are clinicians, engineers, or biologists, everyone should be able to recognize the relevance of this research. Nature Communications publishes highly significant advances in a field, but they are less strict on the breadth of the field. So for example, a paper there has to be very appealing, very interesting to biomedical researchers, for example, on drug delivery methods. And finally, the communication journals have less stringent impact requirements. So for example, a paper has to be new and to bear something new in a subfield, as for example, drug delivery mechanism for the eye, just to give, I don't know, I think this could be relevant to you. So I left Nature and scientific reports out. So Nature, whatever is published there is basically impactful on any researcher independent of the field, while scientific reports doesn't select at all on impact. And as long as something is interesting and results are sound and technically solid, it's within the scope and of scientific reports. So the other substantial difference between those family, within the family, is that traditionally Nature and research journals are subscription-based. So they used to be printed in paper, and literally people had to buy the magazine to read the research. And more recently, now that we have internet, you have to pay to access online the papers. On the other hand, if you want to publish there, you don't pay anything for publishing unless you want figures in color. And the other important thing is that the journal acquires the copyright of the paper. So they get the rights on the images of the paper, for example. And the rest of the papers in the family are instead open access, which means that everything that is published on those journals is instantaneously accessible and freely accessible and reusable by everyone. On the other hand, since no one pays to read, someone has to pay to publish. So these journals are sustained by what are called article pressing charges, which are paid by authors. And still authors retain ownership of their content. So for example, of the images that you use. This is actually quite important because when I was writing my PhD thesis, at some point I wanted to reuse some images from my own papers, and I figured out that I couldn't. I had to ask permission to the subscription journals, and they owned my images. So I had, like, it was a bit tricky, and I discovered it a couple of days before submitting the PhD thesis. So this wouldn't happen with open access journal because everyone can use, reuse, and so on. So as a PhD or a postdoc, that's all pretty much I would know about open access. And A year ago, when I prepared this talk for the first time, I was like a bit worried of how I would fill up the rest of 45 minutes. So I started reading around, and actually maybe 45 minutes are not enough to say everything about open access and open science, because open access is only one of the aspects of the open science movement, which is basically a movement that aims at tackling a number of issues that concern scientific research and academia. So, for example, accessibility of content, reusability, reproducibility, scientific misconduct, and so on. And the general idea is to implement practices that makes all aspects of scientific research open to all levels of society. So open access, but also open data, open source, and so on. So the debate around open science is quite old. It's been around for 20 years, and it's a fast evolving debate, and some implementation, among which open access actually, are still quite controversial. So to start giving you an idea of why we need open science, let's start with some gossip and some retraction and scandals. So you all know, of course, that vaccine cause autism. Well, this is actually not the case, but why do people believe that is because there was a famous study published on The Lancet in '97, which claimed they found a correlation between autism and vaccination in kids. This was a big deal, and researchers, the community started making research on this, and they started trying to reproduce the findings, and they found out that actually this was not possible. They didn't find any evidence that this was the case. So there was some sort of research into the data of the paper, and they found that basically data were manipulated by the authors because of financial interests. So the paper was actually retracted in 2010, but at that point the damage was done, because the news, the press, the media, everyone knew about that, and so we end up being in 2021, where we still have anti-vaccination movements, and people still believe that actually vaccine cause autism. So that's okay, worrying enough. I think 2020 was an amazing year actually for retraction and data scandals due to the research around COVID. So I took these examples on oh my God, hydrochloroquine, chloroquine. Well, let's call it chloroquine, because I tried like 10 times to pronounce that, I can't. So this is originally a drug to treat malaria, and so this guy in spring 2020 he's called Didier Raoult, and his group published a paper claiming the 100% success of chloroquine for treating COVID-19. So he said, like, guys, no worries, we got it, we saved the world, no problem. And this was actually backed up by preprints and other papers. On this paper on Asian Journal of Medicine and Health, it was actually a big deal because it was also very political, especially in France. And the scientific community wasn't very convinced about this actually, because the paper was published too quickly, and it was published on this International Journal of Antimicrobial Agents, which Raoul is the chief editor, so they were suspecting kind of a bit of problems there. So they started looking into this, and what happened is that the preprint paper was withdrawn straight away. The authors said like, no, we got it wrong, sorry. Some other researchers managed to publish this paper on the same journal, and the paper is titled SARS-CoV was unexpectedly deadlier than push scooters. Could chloroquine be the unique solution? So this is clearly a hoax paper, a fake paper, that was kind of a phishing for this Asian Journal of Medicine and Health, and this proved that the journal is basically a predatory journal. So they would publish anything as long as you pay. They don't even go through peer review. So this should kind of discredit the other paper, but it's still there. And then finally, the Raoul published more other studies. They are under examination, and the reviewers found them inconclusive. They found methodological flaws. And so overall, they say this is irresponsible scientific behavior. Papers are still there. And for example, if you remember WHO, they put a lot of money into trying out this chloroquine as drug, and Trump was drinking it. So it was a big deal. Enthusiasm was kind of put off by this other paper on the Lancet saying, no, actually it doesn't treat COVID, it's actually more deadly for COVID patients. Community was skeptical again, big claims. So they looked into this and actually they had to withdraw the paper because the data were coming from a private company and they refused to provide the data for a second examination. So at the end of the day, they just did some more conclusive studies in November 2020. They just said, you know, chloroquine doesn't just work. But this whole thing gave you an idea of how much damage can be done by science done not in a proper way, let's say that. Well, not to talk in 2020 about masks are ineffective, papers saying amulets and Chinese medicine would work for COVID, vitamin D, or 5G and COVID-19. I mean, you can have like 2020 was amazing for those sort of things, and I put down here there is a link where that you can check for the best retraction of 2020. But so the main point here is that there seems to be what is called a reproducibility crisis that is affecting research, and whether this is due to the hurry, for example, or desire to find a cure for COVID-19 or misconduct, it is something that is measured. So in this survey in 2019, Nature asked 1,500 scientists about reproducibility in their field. So the first question was, how much do you feel the work in your field is reproducible? So this means how much do you trust the literature? That is what you like basically read when you build on your work. So physics and engineering and chemistry were kind of positive about the fact that they can trust between 100 and over 70%. Like most people think, yeah, this is kind of, we can trust literature. A bit less for medicine and biology. They're more on around 50% of the literature. Yeah, maybe yes, like the rest, not too much. But you're in for a big surprise because then the next question was, have you ever failed to reproduce an experiment? And it turns out that both physics and engineering and medicine have failed to reproduce other experiments at 70% of time, and 50% they failed to reproduce their own experiment. So then next question was, okay, so why do you think is that so? What are the causes? And most of them highlighted that there is an increasing pressure to publish, competition. So sometimes you don't have time to check how good your results are. Sometimes PIs are not are too busy to check on PhD students, so mentoring is also a big issue there. And some other times you just don't have enough information about the method, the data that were used to produce a paper to come to some conclusion. Some people ask, okay, so is it something that was already there and now we just call it crisis because we just see it, but it was already present? Well, whatever the reason is, there are very serious consequences in terms of credibility of science. So we see a general loss of faith from the public and from the side of authorities. We see the rise of pseudo-science movement and anti-science movement, or implementation of unjustified policies from the government, Donald Trump, chloroquine, and so on. So then the question is, how do we solve this problem? Is it the fault of reviewers? They should have checked better. So, but then the question is, can reviewers make a whole study from scratch? Is that their task to do? Or otherwise one would do a reviewer and wouldn't be able to do research on his own. So then we should publish all results, even the negative ones and the positive ones. Should they be published? Well, who would publish? Since high impact factor journal they select for novelty, no one would publish that. So it's a waste of time to try to reproduce someone else's result, someone else's research, and so on. Like there is all this sort of question. When you start thinking about it, the other question can be, yeah, okay, so don't we have already too many papers? Yeah, okay, but science is based on validation. It's an open question. So what is a general agreement is that a necessary step towards a solution is to move towards a system where you have results, data, methods, and algorithms that are open, that are available to everyone, accessible, and that can be reused. So this is the general idea of open science and all the declination of open access, open data, open source. So of course there is strong push towards improving the quality and integrity of research. There is also an advantage in making things more efficient, so you don't have to produce the same data over and over again. You can use someone else's data, and you can foster scientific collaboration. And the result overall is that you have a faster scientific advancement, as we see with COVID research. So a positive, finally a positive thing of COVID was such a push towards open sharing of preprints and articles and data. And so, for example, a vaccine within 6 months was something that was not thinkable before. And then also other advantages of open science are the boost of innovation and knowledge transfer and more transparency towards the public. So it's interesting to look a bit in the history of open science, which is born in 1660, basically, with the birth of academics journal and science academies. And they are born exactly to answer to the need of sharing scientific results among the community. So what would happen before science academy would be that researchers would research and researchers would be funded by patrons like artists, and the results of research would be some property of the patron, so the patron would have to gain visibility from that. So it wasn't really a thing to share between scientists, because if I tell something to the other guy, he might use it for benefit the patron, and like then I lose with my patron, and it was kind of very competitive in that sense. Then at some point, research became way too expensive for one single patron to found. And so they found that these science academies, where more patrons would put money and more researchers would collaborate to get to scientific results together. And then academics journal were basically the way to register findings from a certain academy. And then other academies would buy the journal that was in print, basically. And that's where knowledge was shared at the time. And it was quite a good system. And indeed, in 100 years, we see 1,000 journals being founded and launched. And the most famous one, as we know now, like Nature and Science, were founded in 1869, 1882. Popular Science is actually the first popular science magazine, so they start thinking also to talk to the more general public, so to people. It's worth mentioning that those journals were not really peer-reviewed. It was just the editor deciding what would be in scope for a journal or not. And then peer review is something that formal peer review is introduced in the 20th century, it's very recent. And it was very controversial at the beginning. Scientists didn't like it. In 1935, Einstein got his paper peer-reviewed, and he called it an accident. Like, it was like, why did you, he was very angry to the editor. Why did you give my paper to someone who says comments on it? Who are you? Who do you think you are? And so on. And it was 1935, so you can imagine it's like 100 years ago. So anyway, back to the timeline. We are in the 90s, and we have the internet. So now internet is massively available, and when you publish a paper, you can actually think to make it instantly accessible everywhere in the world. So basically, you can sidestep the idea that you need a printed journal. So this is also the year where you have the first self-archive platform. So Archive is for physics paper is the first one, but you have bioarchive, medRxiv that come after. And this is made possible by the internet, basically. And at the same time, in the same year, there is an increasing cost of subscriptions to journals. And there is also somehow a general awareness that increases from the public, which is basically that research, as we do, is paid by taxpayers. So by everyone, by your mom, by your uncle. And however, if they want to read the research they paid for, they have to pay a subscription to a journal, and an article can be very expensive. So it's kind of a paradox. And this was very sensitive, especially for medical research, because they were like, yeah, okay, but if they find a cure for cancer and I'm not aware of it, I mean, that could save my life, could save my life of my wife. if I could read the research on cancer. So this gives a very big push towards the need of an alternative license, so which is not the copyright, which is not the paywall. And in 2001, it's founded the Creative Commons organization, which is exactly what provides the CC BY licenses now, and where the authors can basically waive some rights on the content, so it's not all rights reserved. You can maybe make the content reusable and so on. Another big initiative was the Budapest Open Access Initiative, which is the one event that basically defines the open access movement in a public statement as the fall of any restriction in terms of access, use, and reuse of published material, and is signed by institutions and academics initially. And in these years, there is the birth of the first big open access journal, +1 Scientific Reports, which use indeed the CC BY license, the Common Creative License. And however, there are still a lot of scientific journals which are under paywall and are very expensive. So in 2011, it's also the year where SciHub was founded. If you don't know what it is, it's basically a platform online where that provides free access to articles that would be otherwise beyond paywall. So this is illegal because it breaks the copyright, but it's also a very strong statement and provoking statement towards the fact that research and knowledge should be accessible to everyone. So there is a general increase of awareness also due to SciHub towards open access. And in 2018, the European funding agency, so not the academics, the Budapest Open Access Initiative was academics. Here we are talking about Max Planck or the funders, so the people who actually give money to research. They launched the Coalition S and Plan S, which is basically a plan that aims at accelerating the transition towards open access. So very briefly, basically, the central idea of Plan S is that from 2021, all publications funded by European agencies must be published in some form of open access. So this is a very strong consequence, both for academics, because according to Plan S, authors should retain the copyright of their publication, and also publication fees should be supported by funders and universities and not by grants. It has big consequences for publishers too, because they basically force publishers to transition from subscription-based to open access within a certain time frame, and then they ask that open access services are regulated, so up to a certain standard. So this aims to basically avoid or limit predatory journals. And also they ask that publishing fees are transparent and capped. So of course the answer from academy was pretty enthusiastic. Academics straight away signed a joint statement with Coalition S. Publishers were a bit more worried because of economical constraints, and also timelines were pretty strict. However, they started negotiations straight away, and basically they are now formalizing what are called transformative agreements, which are contracts between institutions and publishers, so that researchers can publish open access without paying fees, which would be paid by universities. And in the same time, the community is already looking beyond open access, meaning that, yeah, sure, open access is cool, we need it, but we also need to think research to be open, to be done in an open way. So codes have to be readable, data has to be reusable, and so on and so forth. And in this sense, in 2019, UNESCO took the lead on open access and took the kind of task to define a global framework for open access in order to speed up also the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And as we saw with the COVID, like open access and open science is basically fundamental to the boost of science, for boosting science. My last point in the timeline is that according to this Plan S agreement from 2020, Nature and Research journals, which were subscription-based traditionally, became officially transformative. So they signed this agreement according to which they will give an open access, they are giving now an open access option, and they commit to switch to open access at some point in the future. So now we have an historical overview, and we can go in some technical details about what open access is. So we have two ways of publishing open access. One is green open access, which is basically self-archiving. You can put your paper, your PDF paper on archive, bioarchive, and so on. And this allows you to fastly disseminate your results, to say, oh, I was first doing this. It has no cost for you. But however, it's dangerous in terms of potentially spreading ideas that instead can be counterproductive or non-scientific ideas, because you can publish their paper and say, oh, this is sound, and then some media outlet picks it up, and voila, chloroquine and Trump again. On the other hand, golden open access is basically a publication in a peer-reviewed journal, which makes the final version of the paper freely available to everyone on the website of the journal, and the content is usually under Creative Commons license, as Plan S basically says, and it means that you are the one who retains the copyright on your work. And in particular, CC BY license allows the content to be copied, redistributed, and adapted for any purpose. So again, like you can use it for your PhD thesis without asking for a permission or without paying. So it's more than free. On the other hand, someone could put your paper in a book and sell the book, and you wouldn't get any money for it. So my point again is, yeah, we are trying to fix open science, but there are still so many steps to be taken and so many open questions. Anyway, a clear advantage, they did some math on publishing open science, gives you a higher visibility in general. Papers are more cited, more downloaded. eLife did some math as well and gathered all the studies done so far, and they show that basically medicine in general, open access paper received 3 times the citations of non-open access paper. For biology, it's still a bit higher, not super high, but yeah, well, this is also an old study. Maybe now it's a bit more common to publish open access. Of course, you need to like someone has to pay article processing charges for paying open access, and so far they are paid mostly by researchers through their grants. So let's see where this comes from. Why do we have to publish for publishing? The case of eLife, I guess you know eLife is a very quite important, I would say, biology journal. I'm not too familiar with it, but basically it was born as a fully open access journal, and it was giving the chance to publish for free and open access at the beginning. And then in 2017, they actually had to introduce some publication fee of $2,500. And in doing so, they basically provided, they wrote an editorial, and they provided a split of the cost to justify introducing an APC. So among the split of the cost, they were saying basically the 80% of costs is related to publishing costs, and some are related to technology and innovation to support publication. So of the publishing costs, there are some costs that are fixed. So these are the article processing, some features, so news and views and marketing to advertise the journal. But the largest part of costs are called marginal costs, and they are costs that increase with the amount of papers that are submitted to the journal and published in the journal. So this means, for example, the editors. The more papers you have, the more editors you need. The staff that, like typesetters or other people taking care of the online system. And as well, once you publish something open access, it stays on the website forever. So the more papers, the bigger servers, and it becomes expensive also to run a server. So they did the math, and a paper is about 3,500 euros. And since eLife is supported by some funders, so Max Planck, Wellcome Trust, and so on, they could reduce it to 2,500 euros per paper. And then you would say, okay, but so then there is, how is possible that green open access is free? Well, actually it's free for you, but the costs of an archive, for example, or bioarchive are supported by someone, the servers, for example, or a minimum of handling the people for the papers and so on. And if you go on the archive website, you find the split cost. And you see that it's sustained by Cornell University and other foundation. And for bioarchive, for example, this is owned by Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory. So someone is paying for you to publish green open access, but you just don't see it. And in fact, smaller preprint servers that don't have funders are having strong problems, and some of them had to close because they couldn't sustain the costs of increasing amount of papers. So now we know two things that can help us navigating the open access debate. And one thing is that open access journal should be self-sustained by those article processing charges, which are paid by the authors who accept the paper, who are paper accepted, so the published papers, but you have marginal costs that increase with the amount of papers that are submitted. So there is a trade-off basically between selectivity and open access, which is the more selective you are, the less paper you publish. So you have less money that comes in. However, more people want to publish with you because it's more appealing, and so you have more submissions, and so you have more marginal costs. So this is why open access, if it's selective, it's more expensive. This is why, for example, Nature Communication has a very high article processing charge. So to give the numbers from 2019, scientific reports, which is not selective basically, got 40,000 papers in 2019 and published 20,000, so 50%. Nature Communication got 35,000 and published 5,000, which is 15%. So basically the editors got the same amount of papers almost, so the amount of submitted papers are almost the same, but then the amount of published papers, since Nature Communication is selective, is much less. So now you understand also why scientific reports, the APC is much lower than on Nature Communications. And so now that Nature and Nature Research journals, they offer the open access option, someone was wondering also how much is gonna cost there and so on. Well, they did the math, and the article processing charges there is 9,500 euros, which is crazy high, but now we understand that since they receive 10,000 papers and they publish 800, so they publish 8% of those papers. If they want to stay selective, they have to ask for such a price for publication. So now we put this into context, sounds more reasonable, but still the problem is that researchers have to pay for that, and it's only one paper. It's like a lot of money in the budget of a research plan. So a question that is common to academia and also publishers is how do we lower those APC, those pressing charges? So an option is, well, maybe bigger companies as Springer Nature, you publish books, so you can offset some of those costs with the cost, like with the price of selling book. Or if you have external funding as eLife, you can lower the APC charge. Plan S says, okay, you have to be transparent, so you cannot inflate those. You have to take them to actually what you need to publish, fair enough. And then publishers say, yeah, okay, but since then those costs are determined a lot by the amount of papers that are submitted, what about we ask people to pay for submitting instead of publishing? Would that be fair? Would that be unfair? Would that stop people from sending like fake papers or real papers? Sometimes we get all those papers saying like that the DNA in the center of the earth, there is a black hole and these kind of things. Maybe that will work. Or even more provocative is, do we actually need a selective journal? Can we do without impact factor? How do we assess the research of people, the output of people without using impact factor? And there is actually a big movement that is this DORA San Francisco Declaration on Research Assessment, which I'm not going to go into, but they are looking into this question actually. So it's all open debate. Actually, one good news is that subscription journals are actually very expensive. Why is this a good news? Is that this is because you don't, as a researcher, see the price of reading a paper, because this is usually paid for by the institution, by your university. So you connect to the internet, you just see the paper, which is great. But actually, the Max Planck Library at some point did the math and said, like, okay, this is what we pay per year in subscription. These are all the papers published per year. So just reading one paper is 5,000 euros per paper per year. So this is very close to the cost of one APC for one paper, if you want, in Nature Communication. So the problem right now is actually that the researcher is the one paying for the APC. And we are in this transition period where, however, Plan S, for example, is pushing towards APC being paid by the institution and not by researchers anymore. And so these are exactly those transformative agreements I was talking about before. For example, now in Germany, there is one between Springer Nature and institution in Germany. So if you are affiliated with a German university, you can publish open access in all Nature journals, and you don't pay the fee directly, it's paid by the library. The other thing that one can use is waivers. These are automatic for the lowest income countries, but everyone can try to ask for them. So if, for example, you are in between postdocs or PhD and postdoc and you don't have money, you can try to ask for waivers in all journals, basically, and see if what they say, if they can grant you a partial waiver. And one last thing I would like to mention is this recent experiment, which is called guided open access, which started in January 2021 in the Nature family, and involves for now 3 research journals, which are the transformative journals, the one that were subscription, and Nature Communications, ComsPhys, and ComsBio. So the idea is to propose a new publishing model where you actually don't submit to one of those journals, but to a whole block of 3 journals at the same time, and you have editors collaborating on assessing papers. So this fact that spreading submissions across more titles, so not only, like, you wouldn't have the weight of submissions only on Nature Methods, for example, or Nature Genetics, but you would share it among with other journals. This allowed them to lower the article pressing charge from 9,500 to 4,500, which is almost Nature Communications. But it's also a more transparent way of a more transparent editorial process. So now I see you are all confused with that. So that's why I prepared more slides, but very quickly, I promise. So this is what would happen with a paper. Like, say you have a great paper on a method for drug delivery. And usually you would send it to Nature Methods. The editor there would check it out and say, yeah, this is cool, but not groundbreaking enough for us. So they would just reject it and say, like, yeah, just try Nature Communications, not cool enough. You would get a couple of lines. And then you say, like, yeah, okay, let's try Nature Communication. Then Nature Communication editor look into that, looks in the literature and say, like, yeah, this is a cool method, but it looks too much like this other method that was published like 3 months ago. So maybe no, but let's reject it. And so it's another 7 days. That is what it takes more or less for us to assess the paper. And then you would submit it to Communications Biology that says, oh yeah, there is another method that is similar, but this is for another sort of drug, another sort of system, and so on. So let's just send it out to review. Of course, this is a very unfortunate case. No one wishes you to kind of be rejected by everyone. But it's just to say that this is a long process, and it's kind of a black box, because when you get a rejection letter, they just say thank you, but no thank you. And you don't know why it was actually rejected, if there was some other work that was too similar to yours, and so on and so forth. So the new guided open access system is that instead the author would just submit to a block of journal, a stream of journals. So here you say, oh, this is for Nature Methods, or other journals within the same thing could actually welcome the paper there. You have one editor per journal. They actually make the assessment pretty much in the same time as one journal. So in 7 days, you have an answer. Sometimes it happens that it just all the editors say, no, this is not enough for our journal, and you get rejected. But you know, in 7 days, and you can move on to another journal, for example. Or they say like, oh, this could be okay for Nature Communications, say, and we send it out to review. So it gets out to peer review, and in the moment you are sent out to peer review, the authors are requested to pay an editorial assessment charge of 2,000 euros. So this is basically to offset the cost of editorial assessment. And of course, will be deduced from the final cost of the paper. But it's something in between, if you remember this idea of pay for submitting or pay for publishing. This is like pay for having an editorial assessment. And it's something in between. So what happens next is that the review come back, the same 3 editors look at the reviews, and they create a document that is sent to the author, and it's called the editorial assessment report. So in this report, you have the assessment of the manuscript, so what the editor thinks about the manuscript. You see the referee reports, which you would get anyway, but then you get a guidance from the editor about the referee reports, so what the editor thinks about the reports, what's an important point, what you have to do, or what you can skip, and so on, and you get a guidance on which sort of revisions you have to do. So in this case, for example, they might say, look, Nature Methods, your paper is just not too cool, sorry. But maybe you can go to Nature Communications if you do all those experiments and add this and add that, or you can do communications biology if you do minor revisions. Plus an open research evaluation, which is basically instruction about how to maximize reproducibility of your findings. So this document goes basically to the author, and it's pretty much what you pay for, but actually what you pay for is all the editorial work that is done beyond this document, which is something we do anyway, but it's usually closed in the black box. You don't see it at the end of the day when you communicate with the journal. And here instead it's made transparent. So this allows basically to offset a bit. Like we do this for papers, even if they are not published at the end. So it's a bit of a more even way of splitting the cost between people who at the end, authors who at the end publish and who don't. So if this goes on as usual, then you have a revision process, then you have acceptance, you pay your IPC minus what you paid before, and you get a discount for Nature Methods if your paper was actually for there. So this is definitely an advantage in terms of making open access cheaper. But it's also a step towards open science, meaning that this makes fully open the editorial process. So you don't have a black box anymore. You have a full insight on what happens during the editorial assessment and so on. So it's an experiment, and if it works, will be extended probably to all the Nature family. Other publishers are implementing something like that. So it seems overall that we are going towards the right direction. Plan S is pushing towards open science, and soon enough you will not have to pay any more those crazy article pressing charges and so on. Last question for you guys, and like it seems so far so good, but actually it doesn't look like everything is perfect yet. So for example, this was a post on the London School of Economics blog, where they were arguing actually that those open access deals, as Plan S wants them, they are not sustainable for developing countries. So waivers will not be enough for cover all publications in open access from developing countries. And so ultimately this open access as pushed by Plan S is just kind of benefiting only Western countries and is increasing the inequalities with developing countries. So I'm sorry to kind of be a bummer at the end of the talk, but this is actually to make the point exactly that the questions are still open, and there is always a need of more people thinking, more people reasoning about that, more people discussing, and so also you as early career researchers have a very strong impact in shaping what will be the future really of open access and publishing and science in general. So thanks for listening.
Thank you, Arianna. It has been really, really interesting. So there are any questions? I actually already saw that there is a question in the chat box. So Uday, I don't know if I'm mispronouncing the name, I apologize in this case, is asking if, there is a huge cost benefit for the journals in assessing EAC upfront. Will the money be returned, say 90% or more, if the article is not accepted by any of the 3 journals?
Okay, this is, yeah, I see what you mean. No, they will not be returned because that's exactly the deal. The idea is if you have a cool paper and you want to send it and us do the work, we will do an amazing work for your paper. And we will kind of give you these documents. So in terms of the publisher, more business model, the document is the product. Basically, when you accept to enter this guided open access process, you are buying a product which is the editor's work in an assessment and advice on how to fix your paper. And so you get this report, this EAR, and this is actually an official document, so you can basically use it to fix your paper, and you can go to another publisher, for example, and say, look, our paper was revised according to those standards. So no, it's not going to be returned, and it's actually the way you offset the costs for other papers that are published at the end.
Okay, thank you. There are any other questions?
I've got one if that's okay. Just on the last slide, because it was one of the questions I had until you got there, saying about how it's actually could be increasing inequity across the publishing land for certain. Has there been any looks at opportunities to decrease that inequality, and not just particularly within like developed or developing countries, but also like say many universities in many areas are underfunded, you know, or like smaller universities then would struggle for their researchers because their grants are smaller to compete. Has there been any look at options to decrease that inequity?
Not that so this is February 2020.
Yeah.
There might have been some advance on that side. I'm not aware of that. Like things move very, very fast. So I know like Germany is completely covered, but yeah, that's probably not a very poor country or poor universities. I think they are kind of applying some similar idea as with this guided open access. So they probably have big higher fee for big institutions and richer institutions, and a bit less. So sorry, my voice. Transformative agreements are going to be tailored on the sort of institution, also on the expected output of the institution. So maybe smaller universities have a smaller output, so it's going to be less expensive for them. The agreement, Max Planck, for example, in Germany, they are very prolific in terms of research, so I can guess their agreement is going to be more expensive.
That's great. Thank you.
I actually have a question as well, maybe also more than just one. So the first one, basically today I found out that there is like a platform, I don't know if you know this one, that is like Open Research Europe, that apparently is like an open access platform, and they claim to have like fast publication and also open peer review. it's not really clear for me if they are only going to publish papers that were funded by the European Union or Horizon 2020, and like what position the journals have about this type of open access platforms. And since the costs I saw that are really high, do you think they have a future? I suppose this is part of the European community, but I'm not like 100% sure.
So I don't know this platform directly. I might have to go and look it up. What is it again?
So Tess is saying currently the platform is only for research funded by the Horizon 2020. So the name is Open Research Europe Publishing Platform.
Okay, so maybe it's an internal platform. Is it very expensive?
I don't know.
Okay.
No.
It's actually entirely free. It was released last year. I sent an email about it. I think just before the winter holiday period, just saying it was coming to the Orbital group. But it's for like Horizon Europe or any MSCA action or anything published within a EU, like a major commission grant. It's currently completely free to publish. It's 100% open access. The authors retain all the rights, and it's, I think, trying to make sure, again, as you stated in one of your earlier slides, Arianna, that like if it's taxpayer funded money, it's available to the taxpayer right away, no embargo period, no questions asked. And it's challenging even for our researchers who so far have published many articles, all of them open access. But we work with industry, and so where does IP fall in that, and where does these periods, we haven't gotten there yet, I think, with any of our researchers, but I know that they will at some point. And so right now the EU has this policy, when we publish, it has to be as open as possible and no more. Under Horizon Europe, that's no more. It is gold open access all the time. So in the future iterations of the grant, like how we address IP is going to be, I think, very different. And that's what this journal, I think, is supposed to provide, so that the researchers who have grants with the EU who get really good funding, they don't have to use it all on publishing. It can go to other endeavors.
Okay, no, that's interesting. So what Flavia was saying is that they implement this open peer review or something like that. So that's another initiative within open science, which is, I'm not sure if it's the collaborative peer review. There are different declinations of this. One is publishing so transparent peer review, which is something we do, is basically at the end of all the process, you publish the paper, and alongside that you publish basically the referee reports and the rebuttals of the authors and so on. Then another thing again is other publishers, they have basically a platform where you can see as a chat the discussion between authors and peer review and the reviewers. So this is another kind of open review. And then there is a few other platforms that are even a more radical model, which is basically you put your paper there, and then anyone in the community can comment on it. So it's kind of a social peer review. Someone was saying like, yeah, we don't need journals, we can just do it all on our own, we don't need editors and so on. But so far I know of, it's very slow, like it's going very, very slow. So it might take 1 year for you to actually publish on there. So it's still, and again, it's all work in progress. So I think I can answer one last question because it's 3 and I have to run. I'm so sorry.
Yes, I have a question.
Sure.
Arianna. Hi, this is Abhinav.
Hi.
I'm ESR 10 at University of Birmingham. I do have a question for you. Like you said, there's a lot of misinformation as well coming out from these certain publications, like in case of hydroxychloroquine or HCQ, and there was a mad rush in a lot of countries for HCQ, and it was used as a prophylactic drug for COVID without any proven efficacy. So how exactly do we counter it or control it?
Well, it's very hard.
Because
especially-
because if it's coming from, you know, unverified or unauthorized sources, we can diss it or debunk it by citing some scientific, you know, a reference or an article. However, when it's actually coming from academia or it's published, how do we, I mean, how exactly do you expect common public to, you know?
Yeah, that's the main, one of the main issues actually with open science is how to be open and at the same time communicate to the public in the right way, because sometimes the public don't have the right tools to understand research, and they cannot distinguish from a good paper to a bad paper and so on. So the first step, I think, is to have peer review. So peer review is the first strong barrier against basically publishing fake articles or articles that are not scientifically sound. And then sometimes peer reviewers, however, they cannot go and check all the data because again, it's probably not their job. So then it's the turn of the scientific community to actually be critical towards something new. And of course, the publishers have a big, I think as publishers, we have a big responsibility in making sure that peer review is solid. So this is what distinguishes a publisher from a predatory publisher, basically. That we have to ensure reviewers are serious, that review is properly done. And if we get 3 reviewers saying like, oh yeah, this is cool, but not saying anything more, we will get a 4th reviewer. So there's a lot of actions that can be taken on many sides. Unfortunately now with social media, it very takes nothing from one paper to be posted, even on a preprint server, not even a peer review one. It takes nothing that one sees that and starts posting it and interpreting it in a weird way. Like, I think science communication in general is something that's very important. To keep open. Yeah.
My question was actually does the publisher bear any responsibility for that? Because if it all boils down to the publisher's business model on how they are accepting articles and then just publishing it without any responsibility to it, because the damage has already been done once it's out in public.
Yeah, sure. So the publisher has, I don't think they can be held accountable, meaning like being taken to court for that. I think so the publisher has, good publishers, at least serious publishers, have the interest of doing a good job and ensuring a serious job, because it's a matter of image basically and of reliability. So if you are Nature and you publish too much bullshit, at some point no one will read Nature and publish on Nature anymore. So you want to be a serious journal. The problem becomes bigger with predatory publishers, because they actually don't want, like, they don't care. They just want to get money out of it. So they're like, and they are not accountable for it, because they say, oh no, we did peer review. They can show there was some sort of peer review, and they're like, yeah, it's out. So it's a big problem. Yeah, I agree with you.
All right. It seems it's still a gray area.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, it's so full of gray areas. Sorry, I have really to leave.
Yep.
My next meeting. Thank you so much, and please just write to me if you have questions, and I try to reply via email, and I let you know if this is okay to share the recording.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Great.
Thank you so much again, Arianna.
Bye. Have a nice day, all. Bye.
Bye.